There are moments in American public life that seem, on the surface, symbolic. A standing ovation at a major sporting event, a viral social media post, a political message delivered at the right or wrong time. But sometimes those moments reveal something deeper: how public figures are perceived, how institutions respond under pressure, and how political narratives are shaped in real time. Over the weekend in Los Angeles, during the NBA All-Star festivities, former President Barack Obama received a standing ovation from the crowd. The moment quickly circulated across social media platforms, drawing praise from supporters and criticism from others. At the same time, former President Donald Trump continued to dominate online political discourse, responding to critics, posting commentary, and addressing ongoing controversies tied to past associations and federal investigations that remain a subject of public debate. These two parallel storylines, public reception and legal scrutiny, raise broader questions. How does political capital translate into cultural influence? What role does media amplification play in shaping perception? And what happens when legal narratives intersect with public spectacle? Tonight, we examine the facts, the context, and the institutional implications, calmly, carefully, and without speculation. Because beneath the headlines lies a larger issue: how trust in public institutions is maintained or eroded in a polarized era. During NBA All-Star Weekend in Los Angeles, former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama were shown on the arena's Jumbotron. The crowd responded with a standing ovation. Videos of the moment circulated widely across social media platforms and were replayed across broadcast and digital outlets. Large sporting events often serve as stages for symbolic civic moments. Applause in such settings does not necessarily indicate universal approval, but it does reflect how a particular audience responds in that environment. Public appearances of former presidents at cultural events are not uncommon, yet the reaction drew attention because of the current political climate. Around the same time, former President Donald Trump remained active on social media, posting commentary about critics and political opponents. Some posts referenced ongoing debates tied to past associations and federal investigations connected to the late financier Jeffrey Epstein, a figure whose prior connections to multiple high-profile individuals across politics, business, and entertainment have been widely documented in court filings and media reporting. It is important to note, being mentioned in investigative documents does not by itself establish wrongdoing. Numerous public figures' names have appeared in records related to Epstein over the years, and the legal implications of those references vary significantly. Courts and official investigations, not commentary, determine liability. What stands out in this moment is not only the applause in a sports arena or the tone of social media exchanges, but the contrast in messaging styles. Former President Obama's recent public comments have focused on civic unity, cultural connection, and institutional norms. In interviews, he has suggested that political divisions are intensified by digital platforms and media cycles that reward spectacle. Former President Trump, by contrast, continues to use direct, combative communication, often aimed at critics in media and politics, an approach that has been central to his political brand since 2016. This contrast reflects two different models of political engagement. One rooted in institutional language and appeals to shared civic identity, the other rooted in disruption, confrontation, and direct-to-audience messaging. Neither model exists in isolation. Both shape how supporters and opponents interpret events. And this is where the larger question emerges. In an era where politics intersects with entertainment, litigation, and social media algorithms, how do symbolic moments influence perceptions of leadership? And what does that mean for public trust? Public discussion surrounding former President Donald Trump has once again intersected with renewed interest in records connected to Jeffrey Epstein, the financier who died in federal custody in 2019 while facing sex trafficking charges. Over the years, Thousands of pages of court filings, depositions, and related documents have been released through civil litigation and criminal proceedings. These records contain references to numerous public figures, politicians, business leaders, academics, and entertainers. It is critical to clarify 3 points. First, the appearance of a name in court documents does not, on its own, establish wrongdoing. References can include social encounters, second-hand mentions, logistical notes, or broader correspondence. Legal responsibility depends on verified evidence, formal charges, and judicial findings. Second, multiple investigations into Epstein's network have examined associations across party lines and across industries. The scope of those connections has contributed to public suspicion and intense media scrutiny, but the legal outcomes have varied significantly from case to case. Third, in politically polarized environments, partial document releases often become tools for narrative framing. Select excerpts circulate online, frequently stripped of legal context. That dynamic can amplify speculation before full verification is available. Recent online commentary has focused on emails and communications from past civil cases. Some messages reference outreach between Epstein and various individuals in political and financial circles. However, interpretations of those communications differ, and investigators have not concluded that every referenced person engaged in criminal conduct. When such records re-enter public discussion during election cycles, they often serve 2 functions. They raise legitimate questions about accountability and transparency, and they become instruments in broader political battles. The Department of Justice has previously emphasized that investigations rely on corroborated evidence, not public pressure or social media claims. As of now, no new criminal charges connected to these specific revived online discussions have been formally announced. So why does this topic continue to resurface? Because it sits at the intersection of 3 powerful forces: public distrust, political rivalry, and the unresolved legacy of a criminal case that implicated high-profile circles. In moments like this, the challenge for media consumers and for institutions is distinguishing between verified legal development and rhetorical escalation. While legal narratives circulate online, another dimension of political identity unfolds in public view: cultural presence. At the NBA All-Star events, former President Barack Obama spoke about sports as a unifying force. In recent remarks, he emphasized that athletics, like music and the arts, can momentarily transcend political divisions, reminding audiences of shared civic identity. These comments reflect a long-standing theme in his public messaging: the preservation of institutional norms, shared national values, and cross-cultural engagement. In contrast, former President Donald Trump continues to communicate in a style built on direct confrontation and disruption. His approach prioritizes immediacy and emotional resonance, often framing political opposition as systemic failure or partisan resistance. Neither strategy is accidental. Political communication scholars often describe 2 dominant leadership archetypes in modern democracies. One emphasizes stability, continuity, and civic symbolism. The other emphasizes disruption, grievance, and outsider energy. Both can mobilize voters, both can reshape party identity, but they cultivate different emotional responses from the public. The standing ovation at a sporting event may not determine electoral outcomes. However, symbolic moments contribute to broader perceptions of legitimacy, popularity, and cultural alignment. In an age where political identity is reinforced through social media clips, short-form video, and viral narratives, perception itself becomes a strategic asset. What matters here is not applause alone, it is the contrast in tone. Unity versus confrontation, institutional language versus populist rhetoric, cultural symbolism versus direct political attack. These contrasts influence how undecided voters interpret leadership, especially in periods of institutional strain. And that brings us to another institutional arena now drawing attention: federal authority, immigration enforcement, and executive interpretation of statutory power. Beyond symbolism and messaging, recent public debate has also centered on federal enforcement authority, particularly in the area of immigration. Officials within the Department of Homeland Security have addressed questions about the use of administrative warrants versus judicial warrants in certain enforcement operations. These discussions focus on how federal statutes, specifically provisions within the Immigration and Nationality Act, authorize immigration officers to act when a final order of removal has already been issued. The legal distinction matters. A judicial warrant is issued by a federal judge upon a showing of probable cause. An administrative warrant, by contrast, is authorized under statutory authority granted by Congress and executed within the executive branch. Supporters of current enforcement policies argue that administrative warrants are explicitly permitted under federal law when certain conditions are met, particularly when an individual has already received due process through immigration court proceedings. Critics contend that the expansion or broader interpretation of such authority raises civil liberties concerns, especially when enforcement actions occur in or near private property. They argue that judicial oversight strengthens constitutional safeguards. This debate is not new. It reflects a long-standing tension in American governance: how far executive authority extends in enforcing immigration law, and how Congress defines those boundaries through legislation. In recent interviews, federal officials have emphasized that their actions operate within the statutory framework enacted by Congress. They have also pointed to reported increases in threats against enforcement personnel as justification for operational precautions. At the same time, lawmakers and civil rights advocates continue to debate whether additional judicial safeguards should be required. The broader institutional question is this: when enforcement authority expands, or is perceived to expand, how does that shape public confidence in constitutional checks and balances? These discussions unfold alongside an election cycle where rhetoric surrounding voting procedures, identification requirements, and federal authority becomes especially charged. A standing ovation at a basketball arena. Social media disputes between political rivals. Renewed attention to court documents from past investigations. Debates over federal enforcement authority. But taken together, they reveal something larger about this political moment. Public trust in institutions, courts, federal agencies, elections, even cultural platforms, has become deeply intertwined with partisan identity. Events that once might have remained symbolic now carry amplified meaning. Legal filings become political narratives. Sporting events become civic signals. Administrative procedures become constitutional debates. Former President Barack Obama continues to frame public life through the lens of civic unity and institutional preservation. Former President Donald Trump continues to frame it through disruption, grievance, and direct confrontation with perceived adversaries. These contrasting styles resonate differently across the electorate. Yet the deeper question is not about applause or online posts. It is about durability. Can institutions maintain legitimacy when public confidence fluctuates with partisan alignment? Can legal processes unfold without being immediately absorbed into campaign messaging? Can executive authority be debated without eroding trust in the constitutional framework itself? In democracies, political conflict is normal. Institutional breakdown is not. As investigations continue, as campaigns intensify, and as public figures navigate cultural platforms alongside legal scrutiny, the responsibility ultimately returns to voters, lawmakers, courts, and civic leaders to preserve procedural integrity. Moments of spectacle will pass. Court proceedings will conclude. Election cycles will turn. What endures is whether institutions, imperfect, debated, but foundational, retain the public's confidence. And in this period of amplified rhetoric and digital acceleration, that may be the most consequential question of all.